Hi, I'm Tom Rath, and welcome to the Udemy course on fully charging your work and life. I've spent most of my life studying topics of health and well-being and engagement in our jobs, and written 9 books on these topics, including How Full is Your Bucket, StrengthsFinder 2.0, and most recently, Are You Fully Charged? For the first 10 or 15 years of my career, I led a lot of Gallup's workplace research on engagement and well-being and how to build on your strengths in the workplace, and most recently, I've spent time researching these topics on daily well-being in particular, which we'll spend a little bit more time on throughout the course here today. And in particular, what I'll talk about specific to daily well-being are what are the little things that we can all do throughout our days that improve our odds of showing up for work, showing up for life, and having interactions with friends and family members that over time compile and lead to having a very different experience. What I've learned from a lot of great research over the last 10 years in particular is that it is that daily well-being that matters most for the sake of the quality of our relationships and interactions, not these big grand things over time that compile and make a difference. So that's what we'll spend most of our time on today. Throughout this course, we'll cover things that you can do today to add more meaning to your work, to have better interactions with the people you care about most, and ensure that you have the physical energy you need to be your best today, tomorrow, and well into the future. Before we get into some of the content, I wanted to start by sharing a personal story with you about what's driven a lot of my interest in how we can improve well-being on a day-to-day basis. More than 2 decades ago, when I was 16 years old, I was outside playing basketball with some friends, and I noticed that I was seeing several large spots in my left visual field. And after a few weeks, I finally went to an eye doctor to get checked out, and he told me that I had several large tumors on the back of my left eye. And the scariest news at first was he said that I'd probably lose all vision in that eye permanently, which I did over the course of the next year, and I'm now permanently blind in my left side. A few weeks later, that eye doctor said that the problems in my left eye indicated I may have an even more unique genetic condition that essentially shuts off the body's most powerful tumor suppressor, essentially causing rampant cancerous growth over a lifetime. And so a few weeks later, I received the results of a genetic test that found that I did have a very rare new mutation that affects just 1 in every 4.4 million people. And as a result of that, the doctor told me that there was more than a 50-50 chance that I would have cancer in my kidneys, in my pancreas, in my adrenal glands, in my brain, and in my spine over the next 10, 20, 30 years, or whatever length of a lifespan I could live at that age. And so I bring this up because that may sound like a pretty grim diagnosis, but in reality, looking back on that now 2 decades later, what it did was it got me very focused each and every day on what are all the little things that I can do, that you can do, and that we can help other people to do that give us more energy each day. They do more to serve the people we care about. What are the things we can do that will live on after we're gone? And what are the things that we should start with today and tomorrow that will give us the energy we need to continue to create more and more growth day in and day out over time? So that's what I'll spend most of my time talking about in this course, is what are all of the things that we can do in the context of a single day that lead to that state where you're really fully charged, you feel great about what you're doing, and you know you're making a difference for other people. I'm honestly not as concerned about people getting by day to day. Most of us are kind of getting by and doing well enough, but when I asked people, more than 10,000, if they had a great deal of energy yesterday, just 11% said yes. So my hunch is that the much larger problem we face today is that most of us are going through days, and as a product of that, going through our lives, living at nowhere near that optimal state where we walk differently, we feel differently, we have conversations that add a charge to other people's days. And what I've learned from my research and from applying this in my own life is that if you're able to do these 3 things that we'll talk about on a day-to-day basis consistently, it's an entirely different human experience. Let's start by talking about how I arrived at these 3 keys to fully charging each and every day after many decades of research on these topics. Well, I've written a lot of books around well-being and engagement and focusing on your strengths over the last 15 years. What I've still struggled with, and I'm sure a lot of you have, is what are the things that we can do today that are most practical to apply a lot of this great research and these findings in our day-to-day lives? One thing that's encouraged me over the last 5, 10 years in particular is the fact that there's a great deal of work emerging on the differences between daily well-being versus things that we think about over an entire lifetime or take 10, 20, 30 years to work on. And for example, people used to think that how much money you made was a great predictor of life satisfaction and essentially bought happiness. But the more we get into this research, if you ask people what they're doing at 7:30 in the morning, who they're with, how much they enjoy it, and really track people moment by moment, as we can now do with smartphones and technology and everything at our disposal today, it leads to very different conclusions. And it tells us things like that large amounts of salary may not matter as much as the experiences we have and the time we have with other people, for example. So there's a whole new science emerging on this topic of daily well-being. The other good news about this new science is that it gives us very clear recommendations on specific things that we can do day by day, moment by moment, in order to improve well-being that I think are deeply practical and I've learned to apply in my own life. And the 3 keys that emerge from all of this work in terms of things that we all need to do day in and day out, each and every day, they're not the elements of a great life over 2, 3 decades, but the things that we should keep top of mind yet today. The first one is meaning, and it's about creating meaningful work and doing something every day that makes a difference for another human being. The second key is having far more positive than negative interactions throughout the day. It's the balance of positive and negative interactions that matter most, because one negative interaction can carry such a heavy charge. And then the third key is about energy and making sure that you have the physical energy you need to be your best, even if it's just being your best for the people you care about on a day-to-day basis. The first key to fully charging work and life is meaning. And I know meaning might sound like some higher level construct that descends from the heavens on a sunny day, but what I've learned from my research is that meaning is something that's infinitely more practical, and it takes place in little moments on a day-to-day basis. And as I got into this research, I've defined meaning as any small act that you take in the course of a day that improves the life of another person. It's really that simple. So if you're working in a call center and someone dials in and they're irate and you get them back to the point where they're neutral, that does make a difference and it does count. And we've got to find ways to see the meaning we're creating in people's lives on a day-to-day basis so that it can re-energize our work. The other thing that's been encouraging to me as I've looked at a lot of this research on meaning is that we can all find ways to create meaning both in our work and in our personal lives as well. When I think about what creates meaning for me, I'm a parent with two kids who are 4 and 6 years old, and it can be as simple as recognizing the fact that when I'm reading a book to my daughter in the evening and she recognizes a word that she didn't a week ago, that is a small, meaningful win, and that's progress, and that's something that's there, and that knowledge continues to go on and grow, whether I'm there the next day at school with her or not. And so it's about finding these small ways to embed more meaning in our day and then to recognize the value of that work. The second key is about having far more positive interactions than negative ones in the course of a day. And from all of the research that I've studied on this topic, there are millions of moments in our lifetime, and there are more than 19,000 in a given day. And most of them are a little bit more positive or a little bit more negative, give or take. And what's clear from a lot of this research is that one negative interaction dramatically outweighs several positive interactions. So depending on the context, whether you're talking about a spouse or a work team, we need at least 3, 4, 5 positive interactions just to counteract each negative one and to get back to a neutral point. And what I've seen from this work is that, in general, my shortcut I use in my own life is that we need at least 80% of our interactions with other people in a day to be more positive than negative. And it's a good general shortcut or heuristic to keep in mind. I've seen this play out in my own life, where the first book that I worked on, How Full Is Your Bucket, was all about how each little exchange between two people either fills someone's bucket a bit or it takes from it. And I'm not sure that there's anything that's been as influential in my own life as trying to keep that in mind as I move throughout my day, where whether I'm rushing through an airport or having a conversation with a colleague at work or out for a walk with my wife, it's those little interactions where I either have an opportunity to add something to another person's day or to do something negative that takes from that and causes far more damage. And so the single biggest thing I've learned from some of this work in terms of applying it in my own life is that the one thing we can all control is whether we insert more positive energy into our next interaction with another person. And if you keep doing that throughout the day, I think you'll see how that comes around, and the interactions that come to you are far more positive as a product of that as well. The third key is about creating more energy in your life on a day-to-day basis. And in particular, putting your own health and physical energy first. I've been amazed ever since I wrote the book Eat, Move, Sleep, and I've talked to people about whether they're taking care of their own health and well-being. Some of the people I admire most in the fabric of our society, hospice workers, nurses, really influential leaders of organizations throughout the world, they're often some of the first people to put everyone else's health and well-being ahead of their own. And they do that for all the right reasons, for altruistic reasons and trying to make a difference for other people. But the product of doing that actually doesn't work out when you think about it, because if you consistently put things like the way you eat and moving around throughout the day and your sleep on the back burner, the product of that is that you don't have enough energy at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon if you're a hospice worker to be there for a family who really needs you. If you're a teacher, you can't be effective for your students if you're not taking care of yourself first. And if you're leading an organization, there's no way that you can keep teams energized throughout the day and throughout a work week if you're not setting the right examples as a role model in terms of putting your own health and well-being first. So it gets back to that kind of tried but true metaphor of putting on your own oxygen mask before you put one on one of your children. And for the sake of your physical health and energy, the most important element is to put your own health and well-being first. And we'll get into more detail about how you can do that with small choices about how you eat, move, and sleep each day. You know, and of all the things that I've learned personally from the research on creating energy throughout the day, I think what's been most influential in this work is that what we need to do in order to have more physical energy each day is to find ways to tie short-term incentives that give us better days to the same things that are also good for our long-term health. So I mentioned that I have a very rare condition, genetic disorder that predisposes me to, and I do currently have cancer I'm battling in my kidneys and pancreas and spine and a host of other areas, so I'm constantly fighting those challenges. But frankly, that's not a very good motivator for skipping a cheeseburger or milkshake or french fries at lunch today. What is a good motivator is knowing that I've got a couple small kids at home who need me to have a basic level of energy at 5 or 6 o'clock this evening so that I can play with them and have fun with them and be a good dad. And so when you start to connect things like the decisions you make early on in the day to the energy levels you need to be effective at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it makes it a lot easier to make choices that are good for the short-term interests of yourself and others. And over time, they eventually help you out in terms of those longer-term outcomes as well.
भाई एक लड़की
One of the most valuable lessons I've learned across the course of my career is that if you're hoping to create meaningful and substantive change, you need to set very specific goals and we've developed a set of reflection questions that we'd like to invite you to take before you get into the depth of this course, and then to come back and reevaluate once you've finished in order to continually measure whether you're creating change in these three core areas as a product of some of these learnings and changes that you make in your own routine. One of the best ways to ensure that you achieve a goal is to share it with another person. What I've seen over the years is it can be as simple as telling a close friend or a family member something that you're planning to do and planning to stick to. And even if that person's not great at holding you accountable day in and day out, simply stating that goal publicly makes a difference, and you're more likely to achieve it and stick with it. It's why you see people who plan to run marathons, set a goal that's 6 months out, and then announce it on social media so they know that friends will be asking them about it, it'll be a part of the conversation, and they're far more likely to do it. So as you think about some of your own plans and these questions for reflection, I'd encourage you to share it with friends on social media, through instant messaging and other forums, so that you're far more likely to stick with some of the things that you plan on as a result of your learning here. Another way to get even more out of this course is to share it with a friend or family member. When two people embark on any type of learning together, it leads to far more conversations and far more productive implementation of any of those ideas and learning in the months that follow. At the end of each section, you'll find recap questions that I hope are helpful for you both in reflecting in terms of steps that you can take throughout your own life and specific goals that you can set, and perhaps maybe even for having discussions with friends or colleagues or with an entire team at work about what are the things that you can all do in unison to create better conditions among teams and workplaces and among families as well, where it can make quite a difference. By the time you finish this course, you'll have a little bit more knowledge about what are the things that you can do today to ensure that you're much closer to that optimal state on both days, where you feel full of life, you're full of energy, you feel like you're getting a lot more done, and other people are benefiting as a result of it. Now that you've finished the self-reflection questions, I'd like to encourage you to use those as a guide and benchmark throughout the course in order to determine, are you applying some of these things even as you begin to learn the material, and to think about what are the things that you can do to hold yourself accountable as you go back and reread and review those questions. With that, let's dig in and get into some of the most important and influential material on the little things that you can do to add meaning to your work starting today.